not to sound self-important in some way, but I feel like the work is even more relevant as public portraits of people whose lives were ended because of racial violence are being destroyed, as people like Medgar Evers, who is one of the people that I portrayed, has been removed from the Arlington Cemetery website. That's a travesty that these things are happening, this forced whitening of America and American history. As a white person, I think it's despicable. I can't put myself in the shoes of a black person seeing this happen, and how much more painful that must be, you know.
This is People and Their Poems, a podcast about the poems that make a difference in our world. Host Sandy Carlson talks with people who have become influenced by poetry and who have become a poet or a supporter of this literary form. People and Their Poems is presented by Oronog Mountain Publishing. Thanks for joining us today.
So Steve, you're an artist in multiple media: poet, collage artist, painter, novelist. Can you talk about what inspires you to create the work you create and to write the poetry you write?
Sure, Sandy. And first, thank you for having me. I'm really pleased to be here to have a conversation with you. I think I can answer it best from the standpoint of the teaching that I do too, because I tend to remind students about not so much what you know to inspire your work, but whatever really catches your imagination, catches your attention. And in particular in my poetry and in my fiction, and then the collage series that I've been consumed with for the last 3 years, things that are wrong with the world, things that I want to address in the world. The "be the change you wish to see in the world" quote. And I don't know that I have that front of mind when I'm working on stuff, but I think I've gotten more and more involved in writing poetry and creating work that addresses things that continue to happen, shouldn't happen, in my small way, kind of pushing back against things. When I first started taking poetry writing seriously, I was mostly writing poems that focused on kind of the complexities of family dynamic and family dysfunction, and a little bit of family history thrown in there. And then I'm a member of a group called Poets for the Planet, and we write mostly poems about, praising the beauty of the earth, mourning the destruction of the earth. And we're very accepting of one another when someone writes a poem that is not focused on, environmental issues. So they've just been great in supporting me in writing the poems that go with my collage series, They Are Not Disposable. So
Yeah, and just I hear what you're saying is the poetry really steeps us in our own humanity and helps us empathize with other humans, but also with living things, whether it's the birds in the air, the little squirrel, the bears. You have a sense of what it means to be in this world, and poetry can take us there. And just want to talk a little bit about your collage work, They Are Not Disposable, which I first saw in the Silas Bronson Library a couple years ago in Waterbury, and then had the good fortune to hear you talk about it at the Leroy Anderson House in Woodbury, and most recently was on display at the Woodbury Public Library. And every time I was in the library in Woodbury when it was on display, the people's response, they were just drawn into the images and into the humanity you captured in the scraps that you assembled into likenesses of people who were victims of police violence. Could you talk a little bit about that and how you hope your audience will connect with your work?
yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's a great question. And also my appearance at the Leroy Anderson House was thanks to you. So, so thank you for that as well. Yeah, the collage series, and just one little clarification. Many of the individuals that I portrayed absolutely were victims of police violence. Others were victims of plain old white supremacist violence. So I think that that's a good distinction to make. How do I want the work to be received? I guess that really absolutely top of mind with this work is getting people to recognize these individuals as individuals. The history of racism and racial violence in this country, from the birth of our nation, and the film Birth of a Nation, um, with its racist tropes. I tried to, in the series. There are 16 pieces, and there's kind of a historical element to some of them. Some of them are very contemporary. The images and the individuals span the gender spectrum, span the age spectrum, and that was intentional. I wanted it to be a reflection of, a tiny fraction of the countless souls that have been stolen and the lives that have been destroyed. And when we think about, a particular person that's portrayed, think of the ripples of their life and the echoes of their life in so many other lives of people who loved them, of people who knew them, of people who will no longer brush by them on the street and get a compliment from someone or pay a compliment to someone. So I think that has been kind of the force behind it. And I refer to this work really often as a calling. And the collage series began in the wake of George Floyd's murder with me wanting to do something. And I had the realization that it was Breonna Taylor's birthday. And I created this first collage from junk that I had been keeping with the intention of doing some environmental based art from recycled materials. And I created her portrait and posted it on social media. And the reception was really positive. And people started asking, are you going to do more of these? And yeah, I ended up doing the 16. And early on, I decided that I wanted to write poems as kind of a tribute to each of the people. There's a poem for each person. Um, I still need to finish the poems, but an opening poem, a closing poem, and there will be 16 poems for the 16 people. And in the poems, I try to both remind us of how these people were taken from the world and what we've lost because of that, but also celebrate some aspect of their life. So I guess, the goal is to get people to feel like they knew these folks, because I certainly did as I started working on each collage, researched the person's life, looked at multiple photos and in some cases videos of the subjects. And with each collage, I felt like I formed some kind of a connection with that person. So it's been a very emotional experience, creating the collages, writing the poetry.
As someone who has seen your work, and most recently at the public library in Woodbury, I felt like that space gave the whole collection an incredible dignity. It was a portrait gallery while the pictures were up, and you could look these people in the eye. The way they were hung was just superb. And I felt drawn into their gaze, but also into the material that you used. And I had heard your presentation, so I knew what some of those pieces meant, but the others were evocative and allowed my imagination to wonder and to wander into the world of the person you created. And it was really, really amazing, and I had taken photographs of yours to show some colleagues at work, and they, it was my party trick for a few minutes. You won't believe what these are made of, these wonderful portraits, and to see people drawn into that, and the effort and the painstaking care to cut those pieces and to put it all together to make something whole that was shattered, I think is such an amazing tribute to those people, and a gift for us to be in their humanity as you perceived it. It's just amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I remember when we were at the Silas Bronson Library, we had the technology there that we could scan a QR code, I think, and hear you read your poems. And that was really, really cool. But tonight we have you. So would you mind reading some of your poems
I
from the
would love to, yeah. I guess that the QR codes eventually expired, so I don't have them. I no longer have them, but, that was a wonderful experience. When I went out to Ohio, a young couple invited me into their recording studio to record my poems, and I only had 6 at that point, but, I thought that was so generous of them to share their time and their resources and create these codes for me, and yeah, so but yes, I'm happy to read some of the poems. I figured I would read the opening poem of the series, which is called Hosting the Stolen. Hosting the Stolen. For Brianna, Tamir, Cynthia, Rayshard, all the rest. Lacking the melanin required for membership, I have become host to meetings of the stolen. With no preset time or day, they come to me late and early, straight from drive-through lanes and snow-scudded city parks, from Bible circles, from sleep-tangled sheets, from family visits to the treacherous Jim Crow South. Navigating the fields of judgment, river of lies, they line my squat couch to share their aspirations, their daily joys, daughter dancing, skittles and sweet tea, their undoings. Laying down the weapon of my whiteness, I follow each doomed soul into the reeds of sorrow, knowing I must emerge alone, must ready to welcome the next. So that is the first poem of the series, and I'm pretty sure the first poem that I wrote. And I literally I was working in a space where I had kind of limited space, and I had maybe 4 of the portraits lined up on a couch. And I just, as I was working on the 5th one, I just kept looking up, and they were in this sort of lofted space, so they were gazing down at me. And I felt like a real presence. So what you said about being in the gallery, first of all, the Woodbury Library is just such a beautiful gallery space, that room. And I had the help of a library volunteer, Nadine, so she gets some of the credit for hanging them beautifully. Um, I Early on, as I started working on them and posting them, I was compiling each person's story to post on Facebook and Instagram along with the collage image. And so whenever I exhibit them, I do hang the story alongside the person to give some context. And each one also lists the materials that are used, as galleries usually do. But I think your comment about at the presentation, hearing about some of the materials and then being able to look at the individual things and kind of pick out some of the materials and, maybe imagine how certain things ended up in a certain collage. Because I did try to, in most cases, choose materials that had some resonance, some relevance to the person's experience. Yeah.
Yeah, you know your the line in the poem you just read about wandering into the reeds of sorrow.
Mhm.
This is just me. It makes me think of Odysseus in the underworld, looking for the
Oh,
truth,
wow.
and
Yeah.
truly that hero's journey, that trip to the underworld where you're searching for
Yeah.
yourself through the
Yeah.
dark. I just think it's a wonderful, wonderful poem. So thank you for
Sure.
that.
Sure. Um, The next one that I have here is it's also for one of the earlier collages. The portrait is of Cynthia Graham Hurd, who was one of the Charlottesville Nine, the Emmanuel Nine, from Emmanuel AIM Church. And was one of 9 victims of I think a teenage boy or maybe a 20-year-old, white supremacist who joined their prayer circle and sat and prayed with them for quite an extended period of time and then, opened fire and killed 9 people. Cynthia Graham Hurd was a librarian, and I mean, I'm sure you and I both agree librarians are some of our greatest heroes, especially in this time of, yeah, yeah, in this time. Um, she loved being a librarian because her whole purpose for being in her professional life was to help people. And it was Charleston, South Carolina. I don't know if I think I said Charlottesville. Um, the librarian for Cynthia Graham Hurd. Cynthia guides me, her warm hand cupping my elbow, through the mile-high stacks. The racks are neatly ordered, each soul carefully cataloged, christened in her slanting script. She pulls me past the restricted section. The dangling sign reads simply, K. Stands for killers. Nothing worth seeing there, just more white boys and their guns. From a shelf labeled Emmanuel 9, she brings down 8 gold volumes, books of the slaughtered. Leafing through gilt pages, she releases breaths of hymns, threads of scripture to spiral skyward like doves. Book 9, hers, blazes color. Tiger swallowtails, gulf fritillaries, cloudless sulfurs anoint her with flickering wings. That's one of the poems that I workshopped with Poets for the Planet. And my dear friend Carol, who's a member of the group, put a little note on here, and it's actually a quote from Cynthia Graham Hurd, because she looked her up to find out more about her. And the quote is, "Be kinder than necessary."
Oh, that's great.
Right? So that's a very special person, no longer in the world.
It reminds me of, what Joseph Campbell said about mythology, that we think we're going out of ourselves, but really we're going deep inside ourselves.
Mhm.
I think that's what art makes possible, is that inward journey, whether it's the stories or the art. And I'm perplexed at this time, as you said. How do you invite people who are not inclined to take a look, to look?
That's a that's a wonderful, wonderful question, and I'm not sure that I have a definitive answer for that. I do know that getting the work out there as much as I possibly can is part of it, and so I took the collages down at Woodbury Library on Monday and boxed them up, put them in the car, and drove directly to Terryville Library. And a very different town and a very different display place in the library. It's basically one wall that fits 10 of them, and then down the stairs, in the stairway there was a space to hang the other 6. um, and that physical space isn't the only difference. As I was driving to Terryville last fall to speak to the librarian about possibly, displaying them there, um, I drove beneath many, many, and when I say beneath, there was one in particular, a gigantic Trump flag hoisted up on a crane. Um, and I thought, this is a very different environment, and maybe an environment in which this work really needs to be seen, even more so than other places that I've exhibited it. So I think getting people who are less inclined to see the work with an open eye. Part of the way that I hope I'm doing that is by telling these stories, by showing the breadth of people who have been lost, from, a a grandmother with mental health issues to a 7-year-old child who was killed on her grandmother's couch while she slept to, you know, a black trans woman. And so some of the portraits, someone might be drawn to a particular portrait and think, wow, there's something that's really captivating me in this face. And maybe it's even that they're reminded of someone that they know and love, or someone that they love and lost. And then they read the story, and maybe it's the trans person
Mhm.
that caught their eye, and they're not exactly open and loving toward trans individuals. And then they kind of go, well, reminds me of my niece. What if my niece were a trans individual, and someone hated her because of her reality, or whatever it is. All of the subjects are Black Americans, and I am not a Black American. So some of the struggle in creating the work was, am I the person who should be creating this work? How is it going to be perceived coming from a white person? And I think I was able to get past that, because I had some wonderful friends of all different races and persuasions and ages, and supporting what I was doing and understanding what I was doing. And almost exclusively, when I've exhibited the work and presented the work, um, the at least the public and in the moment reaction has been overwhelmingly positive. There have been some really uncomfortable questions that have been asked, or moments where someone has kind of declared, well, I don't usually reveal this. This was at school where I teach, Naugatuck Valley. I don't usually reveal this, but I am a police officer, and I can tell you that the police are not going out looking for Black people to terrorize or to oppress. And before I could even respond, two fellow students in this class, who were young Black women, shared their testimony of what had happened to them over the weekend in an incident where their car was pulled over for like a something with their license plate, and they were searched. They were asked to get out of the car and patted down and treated, I think, very differently than you or I might be treated in that situation. So I know personally, I have known many wonderful police officers. My cousin was the chief of police of Bristol for many years, um, and a great guy, And I think there are many wonderful law enforcement officers. As a college professor, if I have a really bad day at work, and I misbehave in some way, I get frustrated and I snap at a student, that student's not going to die. Um, and when I presented at Silas Bronson 2 years ago, the administrative assistant to the mayor, Mayor O'Leary at the time, was there, and she is married to a Black police officer. And she said, we can talk about training all night long, because people were talking about, more training for officers about how to de-escalate situations. We could talk about training all night long, but there is a real issue with people going into law enforcement because they want to oppress people. They want to have the authority over people, and that often leads to violence. And I've always in my heart felt that way. So to have her say that was very meaningful, and I think it meant a lot to the audience that was there. And it was a very um, integrated audience. It was an audience of people, from all over the place, and many Black Americans in the audience. And um, I got some really wonderful feedback, being encouraged to go into schools and to present this work more widely. So yeah, I feel more committed to it than ever, and we've said a couple of times, in this time that we're in, and I just came out and said there was a giant Trump flag hanging, so we know what time we're talking about.
Right.
And I feel like the work, not to sound self-important in some way, but I feel like the work is even more relevant as um, public portraits of people whose lives were ended because of racial violence are being destroyed. As people like Medgar Evers, who is one of the people that I portrayed, has been removed from the Arlington Cemetery website. Um, you know, that's a travesty that these things are happening. This forced whitening of America and American history. Um, as a white person, I think it's despicable. I can't put myself in the shoes of a black person seeing this happen, and how much more painful that must be, you know? So,
I hear you, Steve. And in this conversation, libraries are a part of our conversation. And I was thinking those galleries and those stairwells and those walls where local artists are allowed to share their work. Um, it's a and I'm thinking of the stereotype of libraries as quiet places, which isn't always the case, but
yeah,
the gallery in Woodbury certainly is a very peaceful place, and I've popped in there to see the art exhibits during the week when it's all mine, And I think that the quiet of those places gives the viewer permission to have a real response that they don't have to justify to the person to the left or to the right of them. They don't have to explain it. They can just have it, think about it, and go away. And I think let's hear it for quiet libraries, right? Because that's where we can have our thoughts and own them and have them privately in a public space and be transformed by opposing viewpoints
yep,
and to process that. And I think we have that in a very fraught time, that these conversations have their place where they are safe, um, and that we can safely have the conversation to challenge ourselves and maybe do things that don't feel so safe, is really,
yeah,
I think, what our founders were getting at. And when they were coming up with these ideas about libraries and free expression and First Amendments. And so I think we have to show up for the conversation the way you are showing up with your art, and poets are showing up with their poetry, um, and doing what we do to express our love for our neighbor. It's really vital.
yeah,
Yeah.
amazing, yeah.
Would you mind reading us another poem?
You bet.
All right.
Um, yeah, I have a couple more here. Um, the subject of this poem is Rayshard Brooks, and um, his story was one that was very public. He had spent some time behind bars. He was, reconstructing his life. I actually saw a video of him being interviewed about that process and what the challenges were like. And he was just so full of hope in the face of some real challenges that came along with having been previously incarcerated. His life came to an end in the parking lot of a Wendy's fast food restaurant. And so the title of the poem is Wendy's in Black and White, for Rayshard Brooks. I've watched that video on repeat. Dark lot lit by a neon spill, her ginger pigtails, smiling white face. Can't quite unsee the struggling man's desperate grab for that cop's taser, its filaments flying backward from his trembling hand. 3 shots and he drops. Cop's boots bruise his ribs, press into his still back as a witness wails, "Oh God, he's gone." In an old interview, Hope wrestled with regret as he spoke of daughter dancing, rebuilding his life for them. It's Friday. Praying the sorrowful mysteries, I pull into the drive-through lane, banish thoughts of Rayshard, and order Ben's biggie bag. It was interesting working on the collage of Richard, and I'm gonna be really honest, when I first read his story, and part of the way that I chose the subject was by the initial that started their first name, because when you put all 16 in the proper order, it spells out Black Lives Matter, and so Richard would be the R in matter, and when I read his story, and this is where I'm gonna say, I think I'll be very honest with you. I think it was my sort of implicit bias when I learned that he had been incarcerated, when I learned that he had fallen asleep in the drive-through at Wendy's because he was intoxicated. I thought for a bit, is this a person that I should portray? Because is he going to sort of reinforce somebody's negative stereotype? And then I thought, he's so much more than that negative stereotype. He was a father of two little girls. He was someone trying to put his life back together. He was charming in that interview. He had a sense of humor and this depth of hope and spirit. And I felt kind of ashamed that I initially thought, yeah, maybe he's not the right person. So his collage and his story is one that I always hope that someone will ask about, you know, because I think he's someone that deserves to be remembered for so much more than that one video of him trying to flee and you know being murdered in that moment. Um, a really different choice that I made, in a way, is the next subject, Lieutenant Aaron Salter Jr. He was the retired Buffalo police officer who was working as a security guard at the Tops Market, where a young man went, and this is the terminology that was used in news reports, that he went hunting for black people. He went to this supermarket with the express motive of killing as many black people as he could. And when he got into the supermarket, he bypassed any of the white shoppers. So Lieutenant Salter tried to stop him in the parking lot and lost his life. And this poem is me imagining an interaction with him. The title, which is a run-in title, is so I'll just run into the poem. The title is "In the Dream We're Playing Chess, and Lieutenant Salter checks me. His swift fingers whisk my king from its black square. White crown clicking tabletop, he asks, more pie? I nod, tongue a tingle. He's uniformed, not his top's friendly garb. That hangs behind him, bullet-holed, alongside his water engine blueprints. All in buffalo black, badge catching late daylight, hat cocked just so. I don't dare ask about black bodies splayed in the produce aisle, crimson pooling on checkered tiles. As he slides the slab my way, I say, your famous sweet potato pie, I read about it in my obit. He grins. Let's not talk about that. Or the 9 souls I couldn't save, or about white boys who hunt grandmas just out buying berries. We start another game, but the pieces splinter like bones, and I wake, a phantom scent of cinnamon and clove lingering. When I was learning about Lieutenant Salter, something amazing that I learned about him is that he invented an engine that ran on water. And he was on, I can't remember what program he was on, but a few years ago he was on a TV show demonstrating his engine. Um, and he was a master chess player, and everyone loved his sweet potato pie and, a certain style of music that he always played. Um, so he was someone that I really felt like I got to know, and on some very tiny level, nothing to what the people actually knew him must have felt. I felt this loss, you know? Um, yeah. I have two more poems. I don't know if we have time for two more poems.
I think I would love to hear two more poems, and so would anybody listening. So why don't we go ahead?
Okay. Latasha Harlins was a 16-year-old girl who was murdered around the time of the Rodney King incident, and her death was part of what sparked the uprising in Los Angeles. Um, I'll just read it. I think it kind of explains itself. No safety in numbers for Latasha Harlins. Is it deflection? This impulse pulling me again to process her loss via numbers? Safer, perhaps, than inviting in images. Blood splashed backpack, scatter of snack cakes where she fell. I manage to push those back, keep calculating, even as the numbers misbehave. No balance, no logic, just jangled equations lined up in infinite deadly patterns. Her shot shattered skull, $2 clutched in a dead girl's fist. No solving a problem that starts one black girl plus one shopkeeper, divide by implicit bias, add 12 ounces of Tropicana. If a bullet costs 50 cents, how can 15 years of dreams be worth just $1.79? So if it's not clear from the poem, she was mistakenly thought to be shoplifting a bottle of Tropicana orange juice, and the shopkeeper tried to pull it from her. She had stuck it in her backpack to come up to the counter, and the shopkeeper kind of pulled at her and she pushed back. And as she turned to leave, she was shot in the back of the head. When they found her, she had $2 in her hand, with which she had intended to pay for that juice. Um, Little side note: the woman who killed her was given a sentence of community service, and a very light sentence. It was lighter, in fact, than the same judge had given a man who had kicked a dog. He had
Wow.
this judge had given a harsher sentence to a man who had kicked a dog than to a woman who, had shot a young girl in the back of the head. So makes one think.
And leaves one speechless to imagine how a bottle of orange juice could somebody
Yeah,
so carrying so much rage in their heart
right.
would justify that behavior, that choice.
Right, right, and there's actually the Latasha Harlins Foundation in California, and they have a website, of course, and you can read more of her story. And even beyond that, I watched a short film. I think it was on Netflix, and it was called Love Song for Latasha, and it was really beautiful. And it was friends and family members reminiscing about her. So again, like the opportunity to know someone beyond their horrible story of how they were taken from the world. Um, so the final poem is the final poem of the series, and just a little quick introduction. Um, I mentioned that the works are on exhibit at Terryville Library, and that is thanks to the Terryville librarian, Sherry, I can't think of her last name right now, Cowles. But also my former student, Autumn Blackwood, who is a librarian at Terryville. And the artwork was going to be exhibited at a church nearby. And when the church council heard about it, they decided that they didn't want to risk alienating the parishioners by exhibiting my artwork, which made me very sad. But I felt saddest for the woman who had initially invited me, because I think that really had her reconsidering you know, a lot of things. But I posted on Facebook, and I didn't name the church, and I certainly am not going to name the church here. But when I posted, Autumn was someone who immediately jumped in and said, "Contact the librarian at Terryville who is in charge of exhibits, because I think she would really like to have your work here." And so anyway, um, the poem is titled Holy Stations, and it's mainly because my work was going to be exhibited in that church, and it was just white walls and plain windows. And I thought, these works, and I said, these are going to look like Stations of the Cross. And the pastor and the woman who had invited me said, that's what we were thinking, because these people are like saints. And I said, I've always referred to them as martyrs. So the poem is titled Holy Stations. I picture the 16 stolen souls, black faces mosaicked from ripped gift paper, from frozen pizza boxes, from Easter foil wisps and printed prayers. Scissored, glued, these reconstructed cast-offs smile, safely sealed beneath sheets of glass, though safety tricked them in parks and church basements, in grocery aisles, on grandmom's couch. They regard onlookers who stop before each station to witness, ponder, pray, perhaps even confess past transgressions. The martyred saints hang silent against gallery white. In black goodwill frames, they offer no assurance as each pilgrim pleads, "Forgive us our trespasses."
That is beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Steve, we talked a little bit earlier about what we do to advocate for the kind of society we want to live in, where kindness dictates the decisions we make and our behavior. And then we can discover that through art. Do you have any advice you'd give to people who would want to grow art in their lives?
One piece of advice that I always give students, whether I'm teaching art or whether I'm teaching writing, is to really pay attention and to really observe the world around you, and to be open to the things that are sent to us all the time, regardless of your belief system, whether you would call that a creator, whether you call that the universe, whether you call it, I don't tend to call it coincidence. um, but sometimes the answer to a poem that you're struggling to find is right at your feet, and you don't look down, or it's right at your eye level and you're looking at your phone. So paying attention is so important. And I read a quote from Arthur Miller recently, and I'm going to paraphrase it, and it is that it's the artist's job to present what people want to forget.
Oh, wow.
Something along those lines. And I'll send you the actual quote when I find it. But um, I think that that's so important. If something is calling to you and wanting to be portrayed on a canvas or on a stage or on a page, try not to ignore it. Sometimes that means delving into really deep pain. And you said something before about how art through art, we're creating ourselves, we're discovering ourselves, and we're discovering other people. And what are greater gifts than that? So the pain that we sometimes need to go through, whether it's physical pain of the process of sculpting or painting, whether it's emotional pain of digging into stuff that we would rather not think about or address, that we need to do in our writing. And the other piece of advice, and this one is maybe even tougher, is don't despair, because it's really easy to um, lose faith in what you're doing, to not even be able to have faith in what you're doing, to have that voice in your head saying like, who do you think you are to be creating something and thinking people care about it. I think if we care about it, other people will care about it. And if you're working on something that is really hard emotional work, don't despair. And if you're living currently in a nation that seems to be going, well, that's not the nation that's going out of its way to make us despair, do anything that you can to seize those little moments of joy and inspiration, because they're there even in the depths of despair, and maybe it's just connecting with someone else's sense of despair that helps rejuvenate your spirit. So I don't know, people I think very often are dismissive of artists, and I mean every kind of artist, right? Actors, artists, poets. When my wife and I were art majors, other people in other majors would be like, "Oh, you're an art major, that must be fun." What we should have said was like, "Yeah, we took anthropology and math and English and all of the things that you're taking, and we spend like 20 hours in a studio every week too." And that doesn't mean that what we're doing is more intense or better or more worthy, but I think people forget the worth of art. And I think in times like these, art is more important than ever, because it can be the thing that unites us and gets us to keep going when we feel like it's really dark out there. So I guess that's my answer. My answers are always rambling and
I agree with you, Steve, and I think all art is an invitation, but it's an invitation to take a risk that you might be different as a result of your experience.
for sure.
Being able to take that risk requires some safety, right? And so that's why we can go to the library to do it. We'll give our
Yeah,
library another plug.
absolutely. Another plug for the libraries and the librarians, and teachers, and not just because we're both teachers, but Um, teachers have a pretty tough time a lot of the times, and a lot of joy in what we do, right? I mean, I'm sort of retired, but I'm still teaching because I love teaching, and I have the gift of teaching all different ages and different experiences, and teaching in different genres and stuff, visual arts and writing and
Well, we're gonna be looking forward to seeing They Are Not Disposable in other places and being a part of the conversation about what those experiences are that you have captured so poignantly in your collage work as well as in your poetry. And I'm really grateful that you were a part of People and Their Poems tonight so we could talk about it.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
You've been listening to People and Their Poems. So glad you can join us. If you'd like to learn more about Oronog Mountain Publishing and the services we provide, you can visit oronogmountainpublishing.com. There you can learn about our publishing and website services, our published poetry collections, and our calls to submission, and about people and their poems. If you'd like to join our writing community and be published on the Oronog Mountain Poetry Journal, please visit oronogmountainpoetry.net. Again, this is People and Their Poems, presented by Oronog Mountain Publishing. Have a great day.